So this was my breakthrough. I stopped focusing on being a writer and my work, and I started focusing on how can I create a space for others to write and be creative. I was really trying to learn how to create a space that I could create in. So I still was just so frustrated with sitting in my apartment, writing alone, running to the library, writing alone. This morning I want to talk to you about what I did that created this breakthrough, and the momentum has not ceased since. And that is collaboration. I was published along with my friend Danny Newman in a fantasy collection called Step into the Fifth Dimension. We organized a reading in a beer garden. You know, nothing huge, but anyone else who came got to see us read. And by seeing us do that work, they received permission to do the same. This image of, hey, you can write. You don't necessarily have to go to grad school and get an MFA. You don't necessarily have to even get published anywhere. If you're writing, you're a writer. So my friend Danny and I were speaking after this all went down about, man, how can we keep this momentum going? So he had a really awesome idea. We were leaving the Halloween season and going into Nativity. So he had this great idea of, what about an anthology? We could have a handful of orphans from an all-girls school, and they kind of get into an adventure, and each author writes a different story. So he came up with this really great premise. My immediate thought was, man, this sounds like something Edward Gorey would write, which I loved. Danny's mother is a writer, but has never pursued it professionally. My son's god sister is very artistic and talented, and we invite her to join. And then our friend Jacob is a writer himself, but not someone who professionally has tried to submit work or get work out there. So the group of us took the frame story that Danny had written to set up this whole anthology, and we read his frame story, and we said, oh, I kind of like that orphan, but I want her name to be this. Here, I'm going to write my story. And then we submitted those stories to Danny, and he wrote the epilogue. From our stories, we kind of filled in some holes or issues that his frame story might have had. And then from his epilogue, we went back and fixed some holes and problems in our own story. So it was this really incredible collaborative process that felt a lot like what it must be like to write a TV show. We got our church, St. Catherine Orthodox Church in Columbus, Mississippi, to join us at Munson Brothers yet again, and we sang Christmas carols, and then we read our stories, which took a little over an hour, and we had a little intermission. And it was so cool because Lizzie, one of the authors, she did the poster, and without even me having to say anything to her, she put on the poster Tales of the Glories and Scary Ghost Stories, carols telling the glories and our scary ghost stories. So we already had this like really cool psychic wavelength thing happening. And those of y'all that are artists and collaborate with people, especially you musicians, you probably know what I'm talking about. So now, since that's happened, we've got another event coming up at the same place, because again, it's kind of this indoor-outdoor environment. But in the meantime, I have actually been invited to co-host a panel at this year's Southern Literary Festival. It would have never have happened if I was still in my cell, just writing away, trying to find that story or trying to find something that someone else would find of value. So this was my breakthrough. I stopped focusing on being a writer and my work, and I started focusing on how can I create a space for others to write and be creative. And boom, all my dreams came true. So in April, the Southern Literary Festival is going down in Columbus, Mississippi. It is a hybrid event, so if you can't be there in person, you can experience it virtually. I will be co-hosting a panel all about facilitating creative spaces with an emphasis on collaboration. Whatever you're doing right now, think of how you can flip it to where you're creating space for someone else. And you will be surprised how things just suddenly explode.
It's gonna be good. It's gonna be great.